Good evening, sinners. Welcome back. Seeing that we're getting better acquainted and all, I have to tell you, one of my favorite pastimes is watching old movies. There's a lot of great data to be retrieved from your past movies. As a matter of fact, I just got done watching a most excellent film. And, like I said, since we're getting to know each other, if you're not too pressed for time, I could tell you about it if you're interested. I'll take that as a yes. Joe lies injured in a hospital bed. While conscious, he thinks back over scenes from his past, the night of his father's death and the night before he left his girlfriend to go to war. Joe's thoughts shift from the past to the present as he thinks regretfully about his decision to join a war that was not any of his business. Slowly, Joe begins to realize that he has been severely injured and treated in a hospital, which is where he currently lies. Joe gradually feels that his arms and legs have been amputated. Furthermore, he realizes that he cannot speak, see, hear, or smell because he no longer has a face, only a mask covering where his face used to be. And this is also to avoid distressing the nurses. Joe wonders bitterly about the doctor's motivation for saving him. Joe continues to live inside his head, reliving memories and terrorized by nightmares. He wonders how he can even tell whether he is awake or asleep. Joe continues to think bitterly about the foolishness of fighting and dying in a war that had nothing to do with him. Time passes. Joe tries to occupy his mind with stories, facts, and figures. Joe realizes that he should use the skin he has left, the skin of his neck, that is. To try to sense the outside world, he develops a plan to wait for the feeling of sunrise, so that he can tally the nurse's visits and count the passing of days. One day, Joe develops a plan to wait for the feeling of sunrise on his skin so that he can tally the nurse's visits and count the passing of the days. A year later, Joe has accomplished his goal and counted up to 365 days. Joe is prepared to be shown to visitors. He feels the visitors lay something on his chest. He then realizes he's being given a medal. Joe becomes angry and shudders in his head, trying to remove his mask to show the visitors how much damage men like him sustained in the war while generals emerged unscathed. Joe begins tapping SOS in Morse code with his head, but his regular nurse assumes that he is having seizures and sedates him. Joe awakens from his sedation to realize that he has a new day nurse. The new day nurse tries to communicate with Joe by spelling out Merry Christmas on his chest. Joe signals with his head that he understands, and he begins trying to tap Morse code to her with his head. After trying to appease his tapping by making him more comfortable in various ways, the nurse eventually realizes he is trying to communicate in words. The nurse goes to get a man who understands Morse code. This man taps onto Joe's forehead the words, "What do you want?" Joe spends some time thinking about the inappropriateness of the question and then tries to think about what in fact it is that he wants. Joe asks in Morse code to be taken around the outside world as an educational exhibit. The man listens to his responses and returns a while later to tap into his head. What you ask is against regulations. The man continues tapping other messages, but Joe is no longer paying attention. He is still trying to process this betrayal on the part of the people for whom he fought for in the war. Joe taps the question, why? 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 Wondering why they will not let him talk or acknowledge that there is still a person inside his mangled body. Joe suddenly realizes that they're afraid to let him out, to let other men see him as the new messiah of the battlefields. If other men see Joe, they would no longer agree to fight in wars, especially wars ordered by the upper classes, but fought only by the lower classes of peaceful working men. As time passes, Joe's hopes dwindles. Life becomes a continuous cycle of futile communication attempts and agonizing solitude. His spirit remains unbroken. He is desperate for dignity, yearning for recognition of his humanity beyond his crippling injuries. Joe's struggles against his own helplessness embodies the broader tragedy of war's countless victims who face lifelong suffering and solitude. Tragic story. Could you imagine being just a torso with a head with no face and attempting to communicate? You know, no one wins in a war, but many loses. Leaders should fight their own wars. It's their issue anyway, right? It is easier to replace a leader than 1,000 soldiers.